I'm Ken Stein, the president of the Center for Israel Education and emeritus professor of Middle Eastern history, political science, and Israel studies at Emory University. Our center is a 501c3 entity governed by a very prestigious board of trustees hailing from across the world. Our center's goal is to provide timely, accurate, and analytical information about all aspects of Israeli society, people, and its history. If you're learning from our work, let me ask you to sustain it with an appropriate contribution to what we do. This is our 15th webinar in the aftermath of the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas terrorists. We've titled these webinars Israel's 9/11, with each webinar having a different focus. With the superb engagement now of more than 36 guests since early October, we've tracked the confrontation and the aftermath with, I would argue, enormous wisdom and clarity. Let me refer you to our website, israeled.org, and the analysis that appears there. If you missed any previous webinars, you can view them or you can listen to their audio versions. This week's focus is the Israeli Homefront, trauma, resilience, and commitment. Joining us today will be Dr. Meir Elran of the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, and Professor Jonathan Rynhold, the chairperson of the Political Studies Department at Bar-Ilan University. Apropos the topic of this webinar, the Homefront, I'm moderating the webinar myself from Tel Aviv. The shock and horror of the October 7th Hamas attack shook Israelis to their core. I think that would be an understatement. Some have called it the worst single event in Israel's 75 years of history. The genocidal attacks by Hamas, and I've learned this week, perpetrated by more than just members of Hamas, unleashed enormous responses, implications, locally, regionally, and across the world. From just my own 72 hours here, there's a life seemingly going on as usual, but beneath the surface of the day-to-day, there seems to be a great part of the society churning in disbelief, yearning for answers about an unknown that still remains to be identified. How have each of you managed these 100 days? How have you and your loved ones managed it? What kinds of questions have you asked?
Each member of the family has reacted differently. My eldest is serving in the IDF as a professional officer, and he and most of his friends doing likewise were straight out the door. It was Simchat Torah, so in our house that meant the TV and the radio weren't on, or the internet, and he got the message, and then we began to understand what was going on, and it was pretty clear early on it was going to be dramatic. But in the initial stage, I think he was the one who found it easiest to cope. Although he is not a frontline soldier, he deals a lot with very practical things. And I think though him and his colleagues and friends were working in the army 14 hours a day, they had a very strong sense of being fired up with duty and almost an exhilaration, actually, and a determination, to the point where some of his friends who are actually in combat unit, when they came home after 3 or 4 weeks, you basically couldn't talk to them. They were so focused on their missions that they didn't even want to step out of it for a short period. I think for my wife and my younger son, it was more of a shock. My younger son is volunteering in a school, and so he was helping children there cope with the situation and things like that. But after the initial shock, I think that the experience of helping them through day-to-day normal things, the sort of classic keep calm and carry on mentality, chess, football, table tennis in the breaks, those sorts of things, I think that really helped. For my wife, I remember right at the beginning, there was no food left on the supermarket shelves, right? So it really felt like we'd been hit by some kind of seismic event that was unprecedented. and there was very much a state of shock. But she works for an organization called Beit Izzy Shapira that provides services and technology for people with disabilities. And she was very much part of that, well, the government is hopeless, we have to do it ourselves mentality. And within 2 days, they'd opened up their center and were doing work to help people who'd had to leave their homes from the south and later from the north, and helping with children with disabilities from these places. And all of this was an initiative of the organization, an initiative of volunteers. And even more broadly, one of the therapists happened to be at the Nova Festival, and she managed to escape, but she went back afterwards to get the belongings of people that they'd left behind. And 2 people who'd survived the slaughter came to where she worked to pick up their things, and they were so moved that they've been volunteering there ever since. And I think that this has been the most inspiring and morale boosting part of what's happened in terms of the Homefront, is that 65-year-old professors who live in Tel Aviv go once a week to help pick fruit and vegetables on the Gaza border. I did today a committee meeting with someone sitting in their car on the Gaza border. And I think there's something very inspiring about that quiet social solidarity, without sort of grandstanding, without sort of trying to give a sense of my view is right, your view is wrong, just right, go and help. And I think that has impressed me greatly. For me personally, I think the strongest sense that I have is of hubris, and the price that a society pays when people get arrogant and they think they know everything and they don't listen to anybody else. That's a big thing, of not listening to anybody else and immediately dismissing anyone who's not part of your group or doesn't have the same opinion of you. And that had been getting a lot worse in the last year. Although this is an incredibly difficult time where the first thing I do every morning is check the names of the soldiers who've been killed, because I'm expecting to know some, and I have known some. I'm sustained by the fact that everywhere I look, I see people with an incredible voluntaristic spirit going above and beyond and really compensating for the failures at the governmental level.
I would respond with a mixed message. I think what happened to us on October 7th caused a collective severe trauma to everybody in Israel, me included. And it is quite an experience for me, a person that have been around for many years in the field of security, homeland security, resilience, etc. And I've been here also in the Yom Kippur War exactly 50 years ago, when similar things happened to us. I can admit to you that I'm still shook up to a large extent. Consequently, my perception of what's going on around us here in Israel is a very mixed one, incoherent to a large extent. On one hand, I see things that Jonathan is speaking about, and I agree with him completely. There are lots of things that are happening to Israel that are very, very encouraging, and attest to the very high resilience of the Israeli society, which really brings me the hope that we will come eventually out of this mess stronger, and Israel will be able to be more successful in so many ways, despite of the huge catastrophic failures that we have encountered. And I want to stress to you and to the audience here that what happened at that horrible day was sort of a collapse of our pillars of trust in the most important agencies in our state and government. And this is mostly the military intelligence, and military operations. The whole thing basically collapsed in 1 hour, to the extent that we had to face a terrible massacre, consequently a prolonged war that we do not know where it leads us. So on one hand, I see the resiliency of the people, the level of volunteering, very, very important stuff as far as our capacity to stand up to the challenge are concerned and come up from it strengthened. But on the other hand, we still have major issues facing us, mostly on the political level. And I have to admit to you that this really is of great concern to me. I'll just give you one example to reflect what I'm talking about. We at INSS are conducting a service about the situation in Israel in terms of the resiliency of the society. We found out that despite of the unfortunate performance of the military intelligence on this horrible day of Simchat Torah, the military is still getting a very, very high level of trust from the people. We're talking about a level that stands up around 85 and up. People understand and know and remember the failure of the military, but still they see also the performance of the soldiers, mostly the Miluim, the reservists. They are full of energy, and this energy transforms to the public and brings this kind of a level of trust, which is so very important. On the other hand, the trust in the Israeli government, in the political echelon, is around 26%, steady and low, which means that we are led by a government that has, in a good day, the trust of 1/4 of the population, which is impossible. And this is a huge weakness. It's a strategic weakness that brings me to ask very, very serious questions about the present, but mostly about the future. So to sum it up, on one hand, I'm hopeful. I'm an optimistic person. I think that we will come out of this mess, as I said before. But before it gets better, it might get to be worse. Remember that we are stuck to a large extent in Gaza, but we still have a major front, the northern front, which we really don't know what's going to happen. And if that develops, and it might well be the case, if that develops into a major confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah, parallel to our situation in Gaza, that will be a major challenge to the state of Israel. Again, I am both optimistic and confused.
So yearning and churning as part of my introduction were not totally incorrect. I know I've only been here for 72 hours, so it's hard for me to put my finger on the pulse. The kinds of resilience that both you and Jonathan spoke about, a societal resilience, a resilience of the army to pick itself up and do what it knew was necessary. Jonathan used the term exhilaration for duty on behalf of his son. I don't know if that's an exact quote, but it was close to what you had to say. Meir has said about the government and the way society has not embraced it. What does this say about civil-military relations? We knew after the second or third week of the 73 war that the army really didn't lose the faith of the society because the political echelon made some decisions, maybe based on some military judgments. Where does this place Israel? As a democracy, but also driven by a volunteerism and a commitment to the state, which may be unheard of worldwide.
I think that the main issue going forward is what type of solidarity is Israel going to have and what type of solidarity does it need? The type of solidarity that's been promoted in the last year is actually the type of solidarity that says unless you agree with me, you're a traitor. In other words, that we define the group by who agrees with me. And you see with civil-military relations and things going on, that is the government's approach. The government's approach is to divide Israelis, to leak things blaming the army, to take away the blame from them, to spread conspiracy theories about people who supposedly knew and didn't do anything, and all this sort of stuff to create a sense that unless you agree with us, you are a traitor, you're not really part. To the point where we've seen Israel's most effective public spokesman, who just happens to speak with the same accent as me, being threatened with being fired by the Prime Minister's wife. Something happened on Shabbat that surprised me. We had guests, and one of the women who came, she was wearing a dog tag, which a lot of Israelis are wearing to show solidarity with the hostages. And she said, "Is it okay if I wear it, or do you find it offensive?" I didn't even understand what she was talking about. But she explained to me that there's a group of people who feel that Israel should fight to the end to destroy Hamas, and that there should be not even any sympathy with the hostages. Now, you can believe that the priority should be defeating Hamas, but you can still show solidarity with the hostages. And so in terms of civil-military relations, and I think this is critical, all the heads of the military took immediate responsibility. I expect them all to resign. It certainly looks that way to me. The political echelon's just trying to blame other people. And I think this is critical for Israel. Our solidarity traditionally is based on that we can disagree vociferously, call each other all sorts of names like you're an idiot, you don't know anything, all that, and still at the end of the conversation say, let's go and have a cup of coffee. That, or as I once experienced, an advisor to the Likud-led government arguing with the head of Shalom Achshav, and at the end the head of Shalom Achshav walks off and he says to me, he's a good guy. In other words, I totally disagree with him, but he's a good guy. That's Israel's secret, its ability to contain vociferous debate with an underlying social solidarity. And that is being threatened, and that relates to civil-military relations. The government is very aware of what Meir said about only a quarter of Israelis trust them, and they're looking to palm it off on other people. And for me, that's the biggest threat. My hope is that, quite frankly, Israelis have been serving in huge numbers, and that means that they really are meeting other Israelis that they wouldn't normally mix with. They're putting their lives in the hands of Israelis from different places, from different walks of life, with different ethnicity and different religious background. The victims of the most recent tragedy among them was an Arab soldier and the son of a Filipino cleaner. And I note also the way that Israeli Arabs, and certainly in the way that they're interacting with Israeli Jews in supermarkets and things like that where I work, it's actually not tense, which is amazing given how it was only a year and a half, 2 years ago in the previous conflict. So I think that that issue of how are we going to turn around and say to the people who want to say either you agree with us or you're a traitor. No, I know this person, he saved my life, or she saved my life, or they looked after me. I'm not listening to you, even if I agree with you politically. They're my brother, they're my sister, they're not the enemy. That's going to be the key question for me. We will have to see how it plays out.
Again, I'm going to say a few things out of my confusion, okay? My confusing perspective. And I'm sorry about that. I'm not used to that, but I think it reflects to a large extent my thoughts under the present circumstance. In Israel right now, when you see somebody and say, "Ma nishma, how are you?" Usually people just pass by and say, "I'm fine," and that's it. But you can't say I'm fine today because people are not fine. This is very basic. It's part of the dialogue between people, a discourse issue. But I think that we are really in a very, very different situation. So let me try to answer your questions despite of my confusion. First of all, I want to suggest some perspective. Israel is in the midst of a prolonged crisis that started 5 years ago. It started with the political crisis that brought us 5 consecutive general elections for parliament in 3.5 years. Then came COVID with its ramifications. Then came the last year, or the 9 first months of 2023, with the government attempt for basically a coup against democracy in Israel. And under these circumstances came this horrible war, and really puts the Israeli society in a huge, huge challenge. And this was really the wrong time for us to be in a war. And remember, the Israeli society was in one of its weakest points. And we were very, very close to a cold civil war. Luckily, it remained cold, but still it was very, very close to a civil war. We were polarized, we were divided, we were hateful, we were in a very bad shape. It has to be understood by people who are observing the situation. I'm saying that because when we talk about civil-military relations, we have to distinguish between 2 different levels of relations. One is between the military and the society and the people in Israel, and quite the other level is the relations between the military and the government. And we're talking about 2 planets here. In Israel, we speak about Tzva Ha'am. It's very hard to translate it in English, but this is something similar to the people's army. In other words, it's not just a compulsory service, but it's the spirit of the military, which is totally associated, immersed in the fabric of this society in Israel. And this was before the war threatened. It was threatened because the issue of the relations between the military and the people, the core of the relations was challenged by the political disruption that we were in. And all of a sudden, in one day, people were just mobilized. Everybody was mobilized. The military, the reservists, and the people at large. And as Jonathan said, not only Jews, but also non-Jews, Arabs, Druze, Bedouins, were all mobilized, facing the challenge, understanding the horrific situation that we are in, understanding that we have a very, very distinct kind of an enemy, sheer evil, ideological evil, that we must stand up against. You should listen to the Arabs to understand what this means in terms of the Israeli society. They understand exactly what Hamas is up to, and they identify publicly and in action or in inaction with the Israeli society. They understand that they are part of the state of Israel, despite being discriminated for so many years, and they understand that Hamas represents evil. I have many conversations and discussions with Arabs, and they say to me that what is happening in Gaza, represented by Hamas, is contrary to the nature of Islam, to the nature of the ethics and basic learnings of Islam. This is a very, very marginal but very important terrorist, jihadist concept that was brought into practice by years of hate, sheer hate, and evil. I, for one, think that this is a very, very important issue to explore. But coming back to the issue of military-civilian relations, I'm pondering about that myself. But the fact of the matter is that the Arabs in Israel, the Arab citizens in Israel, were called by Hamas to join them in the war of Allah. The Arab leadership said, we are not going to be manipulated by Hamas. We are Israelis. We stand up with the Israelis. We are suffering together with the Israelis, and we will be with them. This is our country. This is really amazing. So going back, so the society of all parts was united in one day, 24 hours. It was different totally from what happened until October 6th. Different situation, different picture altogether. Solidarity in its best. During the time of the demonstrations against the government, the most important, perhaps, group that was carrying out the demonstrations was Achim LaNeshek, Brothers in Arms. They were totally politicized. This was a political civil organization, very strong, by the way, very important to explore after the war is over. In 24 hours, they shifted, they transformed themselves from a political to a social organization, working for the people in their thousands, going down to the south to help the people, to bring food, to bring remedies, to bring sympathy to the people in the south. I mean, this is really an amazing thing that happened. Amazing transformation to solidarity and unity. And then take, for example, the reservists. More than 250,000 reservists were summoned to the military. 160% show in the bases in 24 hours. People came from abroad, taking the first plane that they could to join the military. You're talking about people who have families and jobs and life. 39% of the fatalities of the IDF in the war are reservists. They are up front, they are up there to the edge of the combat activities. And this is the core of civil-military relations. This is the core of the popular army in Israel. This is the spirit of the IDF. And that's why I'm saying that we will not only survive, but we will grow out of this. We will turn it into an opportunity. So this is one thing, this is one story, but there is another level. And this is the level of the military political relations. And here we are in a mess, no doubt about that. Because as Jonathan explained beforehand, there is a struggle, there is a political struggle. And it's not only a matter of disrespect to the military, it's also a matter of mistrust of the politicians regarding the highest echelons of the military. And I must say one thing about our Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi. What happened to this person on October 7th is a disaster, is a personal disaster. Of course he is responsible. He said he was responsible. And I'm certain that once the war is over, he will put the keys on the table. There is no doubt. He will not wait. This is my understanding. To be declared to be responsible, and then he will go. He will go the first day that he can. But the way he performs his military responsibility in terms of running the business of a war, of a very, very complicated war against, I must say, a fortress, unprecedented fortress in the Gaza Strip, mostly underground. He is doing a marvelous job. And the military is doing a great job. And the people respect that, 90%, as I said before. But in the other planet, the political planet, he is being charged of being unfaithful, untrustworthy, etc., etc. And all of that for political reasons. We know exactly what's happening. Not to mention, by the way, the relations between the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Defense, who is a member of the Likud party. They don't talk. This, again, is a very confusing picture, very hard to comprehend. But this is life, as the Prime Minister said on another occasion.
What I'm hearing from the two of you is an ability to balance contradictions. You can balance the reality of the evil that has attacked you with the promotion and the execution of bravery. People flying back on behalf of country and giving of themselves to do so. You just said they left with their kids and their families and their jobs. There is this notable reality, which we in the United States are only beginning to understand. We have had accomplishments. We've been accepted in most of society, but not fully. You can have X numbers of treaties with Y number of Arab states, but are they just transactions? Are they transformations? In other words, Israel at 75 is still balancing this notion of survival. Can we run a state? And those are questions that only come with maturity. They only come with age. And I think they only come with experience. Which leads me to the very last question. If you have a 3-year-old grandchild, what do you want them to learn about this event in 10 or 15 years as they take a course in citizenship, Ezrachut? What do you want them to retain or remember about what has transpired? And I'm not being fair because this event isn't over yet. But what would you like to have them think about? We know 39 to 45, we know where that fits in our history. Where does this fit?
There are some themes that can be linked more deeply to Jewish history. When the rabbis had to decide why the Second Temple was destroyed and the Jewish state came to an end, the answer they gave is groundless hatred. And I think that resonates, that desire, that attempt to generate division for personal and political gain and undermine basic solidarity. I think that's one thing. The other is a sort of more Israeli experience and goes back to Yom Kippur, which is hubris and arrogance. I think those are two messages. I think the third message is, and I think this is typical of Western societies, is that we calculate very much on the basis of rationality, rational interests. One of the lessons here is that an extreme ideology is quite capable of being pragmatic for 15 years and can make 2,937 pragmatic decisions. But you can never assume that the next one is also going to be pragmatic. And I think that is a very, very difficult thing to integrate, because it's not like we're saying that they look it up in the Islamic book of extreme ideology and they follow the ideology on day one. No, they're quite capable of being tactically pragmatic for long periods. But that doesn't mean that they are not, in an underlying sense, planning for a strategically irrational and extremist and even perhaps suicidal mission. It took a long time to build 600 kilometers of tunnel, right? That's a lot of concrete. It's a lot of electricity wiring. It's a huge investment. And above ground, it all looks, yes, we give them this and they get that. We think we're playing a game of carrot and stick. And we are, but that's not the underlying game. And so I think those three things, avoiding division for political gain, not having arrogance and hubris, and understanding and taking seriously extremist ideas, those are the three things, perhaps not my 3-year-old, but maybe my 13-year-old I would want to understand.
I was lucky to wait for Jonathan to start because he gave me the hint that I needed. I want to say a few words about being a Jew. We are fortunate enough, my wife and I, to have 10 grandchildren. The oldest is 18, the youngest is 2. And we are very concerned about their future because we understand, going back to my confusion, that we are in a crossroad. We can come out of this crossroad on the right track, and we can come out and pursue the wrong track. It is up to us to a large extent. And I want to say something about the right track. And I want to say something about the Jewish heritage of resilience. We belong to a people that have had a very long history of miseries, of catastrophes in the diaspora. And always we prevailed and survived. Mostly, let's not forget what happened 3 years before the state of Israel has been established as an independent state. This was the worst tragedy, disaster in human history. And 3 years later, the Jewish people emerged with this miracle, allegedly miracle, of an independent state, which shows the extreme nature that resiliency can bring a system, a nation, from underneath the lowest point to the highest point in our history. If we prevailed then, we shall prevail now. There is no doubt in my mind about that. And we are a resilient people. We have been a resilient people also throughout the 75 years. This is a major challenge presently. We will also surmount this challenge if we do the right things. And the right things cannot only be in the military field. It should be also be in the military, in the battlefield, but it should also be based on a strategic vision of what Israel should be once this war is over. And this war will be over even if it goes for a long period of time, and even if it expands the horizon to other fronts. And in this respect, I want to suggest that we can use this tragedy, this catastrophe, as a major strategic opportunity for Israel in more than one way, not just to win the war, not only to be victorious in the military field, but also to set the grounds for a new geostrategic structure in the Middle East and in Israel itself. We can use this opportunity as a restart, for the state of Israel, locally and regionally. This is in our hands. We can do that. We have partners for this vision. We have local partners, not only in Israel, the Arabs in Israel, but also in Arab governments in the Middle East, and also internationally. And I want to focus mostly for 1 second about the role of the United States and the American administration. It is an amazing story, the way that the Jewish people in America are supporting Israel, showing every day the affinity, the togetherness of the Jewish people in America and Israel as a basis for what's happening in Washington, D.C. and in the White House. So we have the environment, the political, strategic, geostrategic environment to come up to and bring about a new structure that will help us grow outside, security-wise, economically, trade, and what have you. This is in our hands. The only problem is that we first must have another government. We are trapped here by a government that has the support of 1/4 of the constituency. And the government itself is trapped by the extreme right of the coalition. This will be changed, there is no doubt in my mind. And once this is changed, we will be able to bring about this necessary transformation. And I can see in the future that things will be so much better, not only for us, but also for the region as a whole. We have to surmount certain obstacles, not easy ones, but based on the solidarity of the people, the courage of our soldiers, the spirit of the IDF, and the spirit of the Israeli society, I'm sure we can do that. I would say to my grandkids, the national anthem of Israel is Hatikva. Hatikva means hope. And I think that there is a basis to the hope that I have expressed here. We have to remember that. Not just to be hopeful, but to understand that hope is reality. Hope can be achieved if you work together with your fellow Israelis to bring it about. So we can do it.
It's very difficult to close some of the most extraordinarily incisive remarks we've had over our 15 webinars. You yourself have said, Meir, that surviving misery and catastrophe, we turned it into opportunity. Your concluding remarks were, I'm churning, I'm having difficulty on the inside, and yet you're trying to be creative about tomorrow. I don't know if it was intentional, but you're a walking poster person for the very philosophy which you have articulated. In your conclusion, you also said Hatikva, the hope. And I guess the whole reason for the resilience is another part of Hatikva, which is Lihiot Am Chofshi Ba'artzenu, to be a free people in our land. And that seems to be how everyone's responded. Volunteerism, duty, responsibility, resilience, it seems to be overflowing, which is a good sign in this very bad environment in which Israel now finds itself. We thank you both immensely for your contributions.